Thanks everyone for joining again. I'm gonna introduce our jury more properly now. We have Amin Taj joining from New York. He's a practitioner and he has started his own practice, doing wonderful projects in New York and upstate New York. He used to work at Soil Architects and also Nader Tehrani Architects. And he has a long experience of having a practice in Iran and doing projects both in Iran and in the US. We are very happy and glad to have Amin here. And we have Saba, who is a graduate of Yale School of Architecture, and she has taught at numerous places, including Syracuse, and now she's an assistant professor at Cal Poly Pomona, not very far from us. Very happy to have Saba here. She is Iranian American, so it will be interesting to have both perspectives, I would say. And we have Jimenez here, who many of you might know from social media, especially after Reza Daneshmir shared his video. And then he went by Saeed Etemadi in the video. So some of you might already know Jimenez and also know his work. Very widely published. He has taught at numerous places across the US, and most recently he has been teaching at USC for the past several years. Very happy to and very lucky to have Jimenez, and also he's very familiar with the scene in Iran, and he is in touch with so many Iranian architects such as Nashid Nabian and others. So we are really glad to have Jimenez. I'm sure it's going to be amazing to have your comments and see you review the projects. And Yasser, who is my colleague, we are co-teaching this studio together. So I would ask Yasser to join and give us a quick introduction to this studio. I'm going to translate that for you guys, and then we can start without further ado.
Thank you, everyone. First of all, I want to welcome warmly and thank you for accepting our invitation. And I want to congratulate our hardworking and dedicated students for completing this studio in a very weird and difficult situation in Iran. After a quick introduction, I'm really eager to hear about architecture from both juries and students. From Alberti to the present, architectural theories have often arisen from European and American contexts. And the lack of a local written theoretical background remains an obstacle for architectural thinking in the global South. In this position, the relationship between a study of theory, and observation becomes crucial and polarized. On one side, there is a tendency to forget Western theories, to see them as unrelated material, and to focus only on local observation. On the other side, there is a tendency to forget local observation in order to become theoretically up-to-date or even rooted in a tradition of thought. But is this our fate in the global South? Are we always forced to lose one of them? This studio has tried to build a dialectical relationship between these two poles. We read 5 essays, not from some abstract, novel position, but from where we are standing. Beyond the author, we approached each essay as an argument, not as an unchallengeable truth. Not each essay as an argument trying to convince us of something. This is what gave the students the freedom to reconstruct the argument through their own perspective and the relation to Iran. By selecting a very specific site near Ekbatan in Tehran, the studio was looking for simultaneous reflection. A reflection on what we observe and a reflection on what we study at the same time. The studio focused on this question: how could we find another way to think about architecture and mixed-use programs in Iran based on a theoretical thesis? I hope the result will become a clue for each group of students to follow in the future, especially after listening to the jury members' remarkable feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasser. It was very complete and comprehensive. Just to add a little bit of more of context. So last year when we started this course, it started as a seminar and then it turned to a studio. So the first part, which was a seminar, Yasser reached out to me and we were thinking about 5 canonical essays in the 21st century. So let's say it's been 25 years since the beginning of 21st century, and what would be our top 5 picks for this? And we ended up with these 5 essays and each group. And then the second part of this, so we talked about all these essays in the first part of the course, which was a seminar. The second part, when we started the studio, the design portion of the course, then each group was assigned to one of these essays, and they tried to frame their project question around that essay that I'm sure you're familiar with, at least most of them. So I believe we are going to start with the Doppler effect, the very famous Doppler effect essay by Sarah Whiting and Bob Somol. And then each student is going to frame the project and read their statement, and then we move on from there. So it would be interesting to see what's their take after 20 plus years of that essay, and how do they contextualize that in Tehran in this project, basically a reuse project in Tehran. So let's get started. I think it will be more clear from after the first project how we frame this studio.
Hi everyone. Do you have my voice and the picture of the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna start. My name is Fatima Shakib, and today I will be presenting the project of the essay that it's about notes around the Doppler effect and moods of modernism. This essay
You got muted, Fatima.
okay.
Thanks.
Notes around the Doppler effect and other moods of modernism put forward the thesis that architecture is moving from a critical paradigm to a projective paradigm, rather than defining its autonomy through separation from context and dialectic resistance to it. Architecture can now redefine its autonomy through performance and effect. In this view, the meaning and impact of an architectural work are not something fixed and predetermined, but emerge through contact with the forces of the site. In this way, form, instead of merely representing fixed meaning itself, becomes a means for producing effect.
دوباره میوت شدی. دستت کن.
Sorry. Okay. In this way, it can set that architecture in the present moment is moving toward exactly this kind of pluralism. The Doppler essay speak of a kind of formal and spatial pluralism, spaces that are not homogeneous but are shaped by the overlapping of factors such as program, form, atmosphere, and economy. This overlapping sets in motion forces that leave a trace of a program like nature across different spaces. That is, a program is no longer confined to one specific zone, but its effect spreads and can be traced throughout the space. Through these theses, in the city of Tehran, abundant half-finished skeletons are the trace of a halted process of investment and planning. But through a Doppler lens, we see these skeletons as oscillating spaces that, despite their cultural stability, possess a spatial mutability. These slabs of this skeleton can be seen as a space for an experimentation lifestyle. We study these very inherent multiplicities of architecture that the essay names program, form, technology, economy, atmosphere, and the rest directly in Ekbatan as the project site. Given the dominant culture of housing design, which sees dwelling as a pure function separated from urban event and happenings, the Doppler thesis helped us understand contemporary housing as a field of variable and overlapping effect. As a field which dwelling, neighborhood, street vending, the skate, and the graffiti subculture and collective sports live converge in a single gradient. According to the say, we act as urban narrators of Ekbatan who received pulses from reading the site, indicating that an overflow of forces is taking place in Ekbatan, forces that have carried Ekbatan from being hot to being cool. In the same way, we did not carry out the site analysis in this conventional manner. Instead, we reread it based on the speed of people's movement through the site, very slow and fast, which is itself is a rereading of the Doppler logic at the human scale. Dwelling as a very slow, a common space as a slow, and the active programs such as skating, parkour, and the bazaars are as fast. It was this speed gradient that turned into the programmatic gradient of the floors. The present project, instead of repeating the routine pattern of the active public of the ground floor and the passive residential tower in the upper floor, try to open up a new angle by overlapping, interweaving, and dissolving the boundaries between programs. Instead of one decisive horizontal boundary between the public below and a private above in each of the skeleton's 4 floors, dwelling is placed in an interwoven gradient with different active programs: graffiti and skateboarding, street vending, shared private and the public space, neighborhood sport field, such that the residents themselves can also be a user of the same active program. A new approach can be gained through this thesis. In relation to the city, the building is no longer an introverted closed volume. Its section from floor to roof becomes a semi-public fabric permeable to the neighborhood. And in the level of lifestyle, there is a trace of a program like nature in the design that shows its effect in a different part. And now I present the project, and this is the question: that what potential would arise if there is a connection between residential and other active programs? Based on our reading of the Ekbatan site, the disconnection between Ekbatan's residential zone and other cool programs caught our attention. On each floor, we created an experimentation lifestyle, placing this disconnected residential zone alongside active programs in order to produce new atmosphere on each floor. We removed a common distance found in Ekbatan and placed two separated functions within a single space. Um, this is the diagram of the floor plan. In Ekbatan today, the graffiti and the parkour space is completely separated from the residential zone, placed in an independent block. In the design, we removed this separation and brought graffiti directly into the same space where residential life flows. Three graffiti strips pass through the residential mass from different angles, so that it's no longer two separated zone but a single combination. This is about the diagram of the floor of the plan number 2. In Ekbatan, the skating space and the commercial space are located in separated blocks and far from the residential zone. In the design, we brought these two together. The skating path curves over the vending space so that the same surface is simultaneously the skater's movement path and the vendor's shelter. Two seemingly unrelated activities which is in one surface. And this is about the diagram about the plan number 3. Ekbatan's temporary bazaars have also always been distanced from the residential zone. In the design, we placed these bazaars directly next to the residential units so that those who have homemade products can use the bazaar's foot traffic to sell them. And this is the diagram for number 4. And in Ekbatan, this sport space is a great distance from the residential area in the design. We eliminated this distance and placed the residential unit directly next to the sport field. Residents can watch the matches from the inside their homes. The spectators of the match is themselves residents of this very building. And what is seen is not a single proposed building, but 4 different scenarios of dwelling coexisting, which is active urban life. Each floor gives an independent answer to one question, that what form can the shared life of housing industry take? The section reveals the building's hidden logic, a single, unified skeleton that from floor to roof holds a different combination of program at each level. What appears from the outside as a single volume becomes, in section 4, separated and simultaneous word. The section filled the same idea, this time with real-life graffiti skater, basketball player, street vendor, and ordinary resident are all seen in one moment and one structure, not as a separated function, but as a layer of a single atmosphere. The building does not give much away from the outside. The real complexity and overlap of the program are only revealed once you enter it and look at it from the different position. Exactly like the Doppler effect itself, your perception of the building depends on your position and your relative motion with respect to it. There is a 3-line drawing that are 3 moments of the same single building, but not 3 different buildings. At the same time, this project proposed a new horizon for Iranian architecture, while also exposing its own limitation. The question that is in dialogue with the here and now is this: can abandoned, half-finished skeletons, which are usually seen merely as an economic problem, become an opportunity to redefine the relationship between Duolingo and the site's program? And can a residential unit, without losing its privacy, host the fusion of this program? The horizon that this project aspires to is a kind of completion that does not necessarily have to end in a return to the standard apartment typology. At the same time, this design does not consider itself a definitive and ideological answer, but rather a proposal. Its success depends on the flexibility of urban planning, regulations in a residential fabric, and on residents' genuine willingness to accept the thinner walls between private life and active public programs. For this reason, this project should be understood not as a final solution, but as the opening of possibility, and a possibility that, like the very skeleton it began from, remains unfinished and open to dialogue. Thank you for that. My presentation is finished.
Thank you so much, Fatima. I think it was, please note that this is probably the first time that our students are presenting a project in English. So I think it's a lot on them, and I appreciate that. It is a wonderful presentation. Just to give you a little bit of a quick background about the site. I mean, Amin is quite familiar with the site, but for Jimenez and Saba, this site, this neighborhood is called Ekbatan, and it's like a big project. Some people like Yasser compare it even to Prot-Igo. So there is this huge modernist complex and it's kind of it's a successful Prot-Igo, not a failed one. And then culturally, it's really significant, and also politically, it's very charged. There's so many active youth, as Fatima explained, doing different activities, gatherings, cafes, graffiti, skateboarding, all that. So it's already happening. Things are already happening. So, and then this is an abandoned structure there, which has been there for 50 years. I don't know for how many years, or 40 years. And now the students are imagining how we can transform that and bring it to the life. So feel free to ask any questions. I'm happy to help with translation if the students are comfortable with that.
So the reading component of it is to supplement the design, or to maybe, like, in a way, translate the understanding from the reading into forms of design. Is this what we're thinking?
Yes, exactly. So to get inspired by the reading and say, what if we want to take that as a rule and to approach this project, but also being critical of that and try to reimagine that. We know that there is a distance between our current moment and the reading, and how we can recontextualize that where we are in Tehran.
The context here is very interesting, definitely. So just as a kind of me summarizing for myself, Ekbatan was built in mid-70s, exactly at the moment that, for example, the buildings in St. Louis went down in, I think, 75, 73, as a kind of end of the era of the social housing, modernism, social housing. Ekbatan went up. And it's kind of interesting that by itself, it is a very good example of an idea that is not critical to the era, but is super successful and performative to the location. It has around 100,000 residents. It's a massive area. And it works very well, even though that it doesn't look very good. So the performance-wise, it has a kind of very successful neighborhood feeling out of a very ugly social housing, not very ugly, but a kind of very kind of outdated social housing model. And the performance of that context came out of a lot of social political condition of the last 40, 50 years as a kind of creating this isolated community that they have this kind of sense of place, sense of belonging, and to some extent a sense of nationalism to that space. So they love it, they fight for it, and they think that it's kind of place to be. So that is a very interesting context for exploring this specific essay to some extent. I'm trying to understand how it is being translated to this specific design. Is a little bit hard for me to trace the path of thought, saying, okay, what is the performance that was learned, and how, for example, the way that the design was presented as something that you have to go in to explore it, and it's kind of enclosed from outside. That somehow is contradicting the soul of Ekbatan. Ekbatan has a kind of pilot modernism system that it has a sense of opacity, but you see through. So there is a kind of a feeling that you can see and observe and control areas. As a family, you see your yard. When you are in the 8th floors, you see your kids playing down there. And the pilotis become a kind of social hubs for activities, kids, all of those kind of semi-informal kind of lifestyle that is very unique to Tehran. And within that context, so the first thing I would say, okay, this is a performance that could have been learned from as a kind of instead of if it is that kind of learning process, having a building that has a little bit more relationship to the context, at least in the level of social and kind of community activities, might have had a, again, I'm just trying to superimpose the reading to the location project and see how they are connected. Hear me as a kind of just questioning, not kind of as asking questions, not as kind of judging the design. So that part I think is a little bit is a part that I would love to hear more, the way that that translation of that context through the lens of this essay got to this form that is kind of inward looking, both for programmatically and functionality and formality.
Yes, that's a great question. Let me quickly summarize and translate that to Farsi for audience. من حالا باز امین میتونه اصلاح کنه، ولی بخوام خیلی خلاصه بگم، صحبت امین این هستش که خب اکباتان مجموعه‌ای که خیلی خوب ما میشناسیمش، خیلی خوب داره کار میکنه از نظر فرهنگی اجتماعی، فعالیت‌ها همیشه اینجا بوده و این کاری که ما اینجا داریم میکنیم یک انگار مسیر برعکسمونه، یک مغایرت‌هایی داره، یه جوری آنتیتز چیزی هست که اکباتان بوده همیشه. و سوالی که همین داره اینه که شما اون ریدینگ رو، اون متن اسای مقاله‌ای که داشتین رو چطوری خوندین و ترجمه کردین به این ساختمونی که هست. به عبارت دیگه چطوری اون باعث شده یک فیلتری بشه متن مقاله که تبدیل بشه طراحی شما از یک مدل تیپیکال اکباتانی به این چیزی که جوری آنتیتز اون هست در این سایت موجود، اگه درست فهمیده باشم همینجا.
خب چیزی که من میتونم الان بگم دیگه، درسته؟
بله.
چیزی که از خود مقاله بهش رسیدیم این بود که به نظر من مقاله داره به ما میگه که همیشه در واقع معماری الان در برابر یک سری نیروهایی که داره انگار سرریز میشه بهش و حالا این نیروهایی که داره سرریز میشه بهش ما اومدیم متفاوت خوانش کردیم که پروگرام‌های مختلف و نسبت به در واقع سرعت پروگرام‌ها و سرعت آدم‌ها کنار هم دیگه قرار دادیم و یه جورایی اون اسلب‌های تکراری و همیشگی که اکباتان داره و سازه ما هم داشت سعی کردیم که اون رو اسلب نبینیم، در واقع یک تجربه‌ای برای یک زندگی جدید، یک لایف استایل جدیدی ببینیم. در واقع تغییر دیاگرامی بود که برای اون جدا افتادگی فضاهای مسکونی اکباتان و دیگه فضاهای کول اکباتان خواستیم ترجمهش بکنیم.
خیلی ممنون. So the answer is that basically I think they're referring to the hot and cool dialectic in the original essay, and they're saying that they're reading the original Ekbatan as a hot modernist, formula with pancake slabs, everything zoned. We have activity zone separate from the residential zone, and here we are bringing the cool, which are those activities, into the hot by merging those into the existing building and transforming the slabs and basically compiling all these activities under one roof in the same building.
Thank you, Ryan, for your presentation and for your answer. I think you had an excellent representational style of the project as well. I think graphically, everything was really strong. And the essay is an interesting one as it relates to housing, because Stonewall and Whiting were writing at a moment when architecture was emerging from decades of theoretical critique. And I think as this essay relates to housing, it might go against their post-critical optimism, because housing essentially is fundamentally rooted in politics, labor, what that means to domesticity and collective life. So I know that they pose essentially, instead of asking what is wrong with society, can architecture produce new organizational possibilities within the world as it exists? And so I think that's where your project is incredibly strong. It's where you thought of housing as that organizing relationship between people and its resources and its ownership and space. And so I think you did, maybe that's what you took away from the essay as it could relate to housing, is then thinking organizationally that housing fundamentally is an organizational problem. And so where I would push you to think about this as you move forward with your project is also the Doppler read as it relates. How can units be clustered? What are those relationships between private and shared space? How do those circulation systems produce encounters? And how are your resources distributed? Which I think you're doing already so well. I really love that you've taken the idea of the ground plane and you've distributed the ground plane across the entire project sectionally. So I think that really can think about like not what housing means, but really what housing can do. And this is where I think your diagrams were really excellent. And relating to the essay, your diagram was that tool for organizing those social relationships rather than composing form. So I think that's all really strong. Where I would push you probably is maybe the role of the tectonics in your project, because your maybe thesis reminds me a lot of the work of OMA, like whether it's Manhattan transcripts and you think about kind of the role of the section in a tower and how each floor is doing something different, or even some of their unbuilt work, which is like OMA's Agadir Center, which was so much about slab. And so I think tectonically, I'm not seeing so much what the frame can do in your project, but what I would really be pushing is the potential of the slab. Because I love how you've treated it on the ground floor and how it becomes thick and it has operations of bullion and carving out. But I think you lose that tectonic language as it moves up into the section, because you introduce program that's very horizontal, but when you want to be thinking about housing, you have to kind of resolve how it works, even if it's a sectional project. So I would push the role of maybe tectonically, not so much frame, but what the slab could be, if that is the tectonic language of the project.
Wonderful, thanks so much. I will give a very quick translation so we can manage the time, and then I'm sure students can later on, they're recording this and later on they can get a full translation of all the jury says. But خیلی سریع بگم، صبا اشاره کرد به این که به پتانسیل بالای پروژه از یک جهت، روابط اجتماعی جدیدی که دارین در این مجموعه گرد هم میارین، از این ترکیب پیچیده‌ای که تو دیاگرام و استفاده جالب از دیاگرام، و نکته‌ای که به نظرش جا داشت که پروژه بهتر پیش بره، کنترل بیشتر روی تکتونیک ماجرا و همینطور روی حل کردن هاوزینگ دیگه. هاوزینگ به عنوان یک پروگرامی که خیلی جدیه و دیمندهای خودش رو داره و اینکه اون رو ما چطوری بتونیم حل کنیم با همین اکتیویتی ها، جا داره که با جزئیات بیشتری حل بشه. Thanks so much.
Maybe I can just add a little bit. If can I or
Absolutely.
the student want to respond?
I think no, it's good to have your comment.
Okay, all right. I'm very familiar with Bob and Sarah's position, and if I were to reflect on, when they worked on this essay, and after this essay, of course, they each went on their own paths. I'm much more familiar with the path that Bob Somo took, and maybe I can speak to that a bit more. And I like Saba's mention of Agadir, because I think part of Bob's takeaway. We can really think about Agadir, and in just a moment I'll also kind of add an additional project for us to think about, right? Let's just say, for lack of better words, singular on the outside, but complex on the inside, right? I think like for something to be easy, for something to be cool, because after this essay, Bob wrote 12 ways to get back into shape. He also wrote Green Dot 101, both of which he really talked about, this idea of the easy, right? Is easy and cool synonymous? A little bit, right? Again, let's talk about the idea of the singular outline. If a building has too many moves or too complex of moves, or if the moves in themselves are, let's say, accidental results of many processes, and therefore not a deliberate idea about the communicative quality of the building from afar, like the elevation, the shape of the elevation, for example, right? It's not to say that every shape needs to be a complex shape. A rectangle is still a shape, right? A rectangle is still a shape. And in a way, when I read this drawing, I really like the drawings, by the way, by the student. Like, I think the front axons or the other exploded drawings, there are many fantastic highlights from the drawings, which you should know. I think it's very commendable. And I think about this idea: if it's easy from the outside but complex from the inside, you're exactly doing that, right? Like, I think especially in this sectional diagram, we're totally reading this idea that it's rich, dynamic, many things are happening, and many atypical conditions from level to level. And I can see how this idea of the atypical conditions from level to level would, evoke the reading of Agadir from Saba, because I agree. I think there's this idea that outside is concealed, inside is revealed. But I would also add to Agadir another project, which is Jisu Library. Jisu Library is another unbuilt OMA project. This idea that the boulevard of Paris is a public and continuous surface that enters the interior, and this idea of the public exterior becomes a public interior. Programmatically, the library is a public interior, and at the time when you, if later you look up this really incredible physical model that OMA built back when they made the proposal, this legibility of the continuity of the inside to outside is very readable, and it's a rectangle, right? And it's a rectangle. Later in OMA's career, about 20 years after the proposal, maybe less than 20 years after the proposal of Jisoo, you can still read traces of that diagram at the Seattle Public Library, which is, once more kind of easy, legible icon from the exterior, but complex, continuous a series of pockets of zones on the interior, right? I think Saba has mentioned of tectonic. I also want to echo this. Each time we do these kinds of projects, even in a diagram, especially in a diagram, I'm a big proponent of how should I say this? Structural plausibility, right? Like even when you make a very simple diagram, we're not structural engineers. We're architects that design, buildings. But if something begins to read structurally implausible, I can see how seems like you are. I'm sorry to get technical about this, but the level above the skateboard seems like there's an attempt to thicken the. I don't know if that's going to be like a Virendale truss system or something like that. I know we're not talking about structure, but if you were to heavily suggest that that thickened level is a structural level, right? And therefore you can have a long span below the structural level to have a skate park. I think this idea of the projective, as far as I can recall, many conversations that I've had with Bob Sommel, if you were to, the sleight of hand of embedding complex world is also through the pragmatism of what the architecture is demanding. And I can see how, since you're demanding a long span due to a desire for a skate park, maybe that structural level above is the compact level where you're stuffing a bunch of, here you're doing graffiti, but I can also see how, the compactness of the structural level, if it's Virendale, right? Maybe there's an inherent design opportunity due to its many constraints. Due to its many constraints, we can now very rationally project things that ought to be there since we have limited options. But the limited options also means that you have a very specific. The architecture is asking you something very specific in response. I don't want to take up too much time, but I really like drawings and I really like the project. It's good.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful set of comments. Let's بچه‌ها میشه اسلایدها رو بچرخونین، یعنی خیلی طولانی، نیم ساعت روی اسلاید نمونیم که این همه دراینگ دیگه‌تون هم ببینیم. So because I'm asking them to change the slides while we are talking, because we are in an online jury and we don't have a model in front of us, so it would be good to see it from different angles and different ideas. اون اسلایدهای خود این ساختمون و اینا که بتونیم مثلا بیشتر ازش ببینیم فراتر از دیاگرام. And I'm gonna do a very quick translation, very rich set of comments, but I'm gonna just say it very briefly. خیلی دوست داشتن پروژه رو و تعریف کردن ازش. یاد پروژه آگادیر OMA افتادن، هم سبا هم هیمنز، و پروژه‌ای که از بیرون یک پروژه ساده است ولی اتفاقات داره در داخلش میفته، اسلبا دارن حرکت میکنن و اون حالت دیاگراماتیک رو در داخل داره. هیمنز گفت که خیلی با باب سومال آشناه، با نوشته هاش اشاره کرد به چند تا از مقاله‌اش که اتفاقا ما تو کلاس نهایی صحبت کرده بودیم و این ایده که شیپ ساده مثل مثلث چطوری میتونه یک پروژه رو عوض کنه و قدرت دیاگرام و اون سکشن و اینا. در نهایت باز مطلبی که مشابه مطلبی که سبا گفت، در مورد دیولپ شدن بیشتر سازه ساختمون دیگه. اون سکشنی که ما داشتیم می‌دیدیم لحظه آخر خیلی دیاگرامی بود، یه جاهای اسلبا خیلی معنی نمیداد، معلوم نبود دهنه‌ها چه جوری وایستادن. حتی گفت اون طبقه‌ای که گرافیتی بوده میشد مثلا یک لول حالت ویرندیل تراس باشه، حالت ساز خرپایی باشه که اجازه بده ما پایین اون حرکات با اسلب بزنیم و اینا. خلاصه یه سری از نظر گفت من متوجهم که این پروژه راجع به سازه نیست، ولی باید لجیبل باشه و باید که کار کنه از نظر سازه‌ای هم. و خب ما میدونیم این پروژه خیلی مثلا دیر گرد هم اومد، مشخصا همه چیش ریزالو نشده، ولی از نظر کانسپت فکر میکنم که همه دوست داشتن. یاسر جان شما اگه نکته میخواین اضافه کنین و الا بریم پروژه بعدی.
بریم بعدی. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
use Spartan in Iran as a counter-argument for contextualism. In its own context in St. Louis, the building failed, but in an apparently unrelated context, it is really alive.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much about your valuable comment and feedback. That's my pleasure to present my work today. Thank you.
مرسی فاطمه جان، خیلی عالی، خیلی ممنون. Okay, I believe the next group is representing Scott Cohen, which our jury is familiar with. And Scott wrote this very famous essay about the hidden core in architecture. And what he argued was that basically the digital architecture was unable to really transform the core of the building, and it mainly is doing the shell because, you know, it's expensive and for so many reasons, or maybe people are not creative enough or daring enough, they don't use this new technology to advance the guts of the building, and they're mostly doing the skin and cosmetic work. But when you look at this section, most of the buildings still have the 19th century diagram of pancaking slabs and very typical structure. Even the most, like some of the very complex famous digital architecture projects, when you look at the inside of them, they look like that. And he is advocating for use of the technology and geometry to transform what he calls the hidden core of architecture. So this group is responding to that essay. بچه‌ها هر وقت آماده این میتونین که شروع کنیم.
Hello, my name is Mohammed. Together with Aylar, we work on a Scott Cohen thesis, and it's our pleasure to present our project, to share with you today.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
In Hidden Core of Architecture, Scott Cohen argues that the central problem of contemporary architecture lies in the neglect of building's core. The part of the building that endures beyond facade and interior finishes, that is ultimately has the greatest impact on spatial organization and long-term feature. The Cohen architecture can only achieve last relevance in inheritance and structural and core of the building rather than focusing on mutable envelopes and impermanence image. From the perspective, architecture can only magnificently shape the future when it's moved beyond the surfaces and engage with the part of the building that most resistant challenge. Its core and structural framework, any design decision that avoids direct engagement with this layer effectively transfer architecture responsibility to temporality, replaceable, and short-lived element. Though the lens of mixed-use residential project in Iran can be understood not as the design of new object, but as intervention into an existing core, if what ultimately endure architecture is neither the facade nor the image of building, but rather its spatial and structural framework, the project primary task is no longer the creation of new envelope. The unfinished concrete skeleton located adjacent to one Iran's most significant modern housing complex can therefore be understood through a different lens, rather than being seen as a stalled development or an abandoned investment that can be read as a core that still retains the capacity to produce future possibilities. The project site is situated with a diverse constellation of urban programs ranging from sports facilities and tennis courts to retail space, cafes, restaurants, religions institute, and every neighborhood services. The diversity suggested that the site is not part of a purely residential fabric, but rather occupation point of intersection between multiple forms of everyday life, where dwelling, recreation, social interaction, and collective activities coexist. Yet the significance of these conditions lies not simply in the multiplicity of programs, but the ways they overlap and intersect. In everyday life, the boundaries between these programs are far less rigid than they appear in urban plans. The same conversion that takes a place in a cafe may also unfold in the day courtyard of monks along the edge of tennis courts with a shop or a pedestrian path. What exists around the site, therefore, is not a collection of isolated programs, but a network of activities and social relationships that continuously overlap, interact, and redefine one another. The existing structure consists of a conventional reinforcement concrete frame and a generic envelope, a building that attempts to relate itself to the context of Ekbatan through its formal language. However, this is a reassemblance, its roots more surface image and facade that is in project, spatial and structural logic. While the value of Ekbatan lies no merely in this modernist appearance, but in this structural capacity, the flexibility of its spatial organization and its relationship with collective living and existing building merely reproduce the superficial sign of this heritage. The project being with a simple question: what if existing unfinished skeleton were understood not as the remains of failed development, but as architecture's raw material? The existing structure is reminiscent of modernist domino logic, a network of columns and slabs that was originally designed to accommodate change and programmatic freeform. Over time, this flexibility has turned into suspended condition. Instead of replacing the structure, the project decided to hack it. A new belt of beam, columns, and slab formed around the existing skeleton. Part of the structure is preserved, part of expanded, and part is redefined. As a result, rather than being demolished by building being to grow. The project key moment occur when the slab leaves their natural state. Here, the slab is no longer a flat surface. For simply accommodating program, each slab under the pressure of different programmatic force, stretch and recede or thickness. Programs are not instead to the building. The sediment within the structure itself. Collective space, dwelling, public activities, and shared program each leave their trace on the geometry of slab. Project form is not the result of assembling volumes. It is the outcome of the accumulation of this programmatic pressure. In this context, the car shift from being purely services-based element into generative force instead of being hidden in the basement. It is elevated into the building's height, and the movement across floor become part of architectural experience. The circulation of vehicle, stopping point, access route, and the surrounding space deform the slab and redefine the project spatial organization. In this project, the car is not mean of the movement. It is force the process of form. Ultimately, the project does not design a building, rather than its place existing structure into the process of mutation and evolution. The resulting form is not derived from a predetermined image, but form a continuous negotiation between the existing structure, the programs, and the movement. The plan is organized as a layered ecology of program. Each dwelling is directly connected to its own parking space while being woven into a network of collective and public activities, living therefore across not in isolation, but within overlap of multiple programmatic layers. By opening the building's core, a section like this is revealed. Each program imposes designate spatial and functional requirements on the structures and this force, acting at different points in the building, therefore slab and recognize the structural system. As a result, the project form is not the product of predefined geometry. Rather, it's emerged from the continuous negotiation between dwelling, collective space, car movement, and public program. At each level, different configuration of programs, its form, and this variation generates a new geometry. At each level, a different configuration of program is formed, and this variation generates a new geometry. A condition in which no single program determines the form on this own, and this final shape of the building emerged from the continuous interaction between different programs. The final form of the project can be read as the result of programmatic amalgam. And the last sentence I wanted to say, architecture is located in the section, not in the facade. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohammed John. I think it's a radical project trying to adapt the original essay which is arguing for the core of the building, and then is against doing work only on the facade. But here, Muhammad is just keeping the facade neutral and attacking the hidden core of architecture here. So happy to have your comments. And it's good to flip around the slide so we can see different drawings.
Why don't I start, since in the interest of time, I'll just say something. Great. I like the project as well. Somehow this project is even more Agadir than Agadir, yeah, if that makes sense. I think, you were introducing a lot, but but in another way, as you're kind of presenting the structural thinking and maybe the circulation logic, I can't help but think about the I-beam proposal by Scott Cohen as well, where, I guess this idea of the irregular, they're not even really plates at a certain point, but more, I guess, irregular surfaces that are intersected by diagonal structural members. I mean, I'm describing the I-beam competition project, but there's something here that does recall that diagram. And I also was reminded of Scott Cohen's relationship with circulation, like the circulation continuity, right? One time, and you can probably find a lecture. Scott Cohen is a really incredible speaker. Like, I think he's just so charismatic and intelligent to listen to, right? And you can probably find this lecture. There's one lecture where he spent almost 3 hours talking about handrails. I don't know if you guys have seen this lecture or know about it, but and this is in relation to the University of Michigan project that he did, the addition to the architecture school. The reason why he was able to speak, and you would think normally when people talk about handrails, it's quite boring. But in his case, it was some of the most captivating 2 or 3 hours where he. So how can anyone talk about handrail with such enthusiasm? He argued that the handrail is the one opportunity for architects to draw a single line in 3 dimensions, right? And this line in 3 dimensions is material. Like, this is a material 3-dimensional line that we draw in 3 dimensions. And therefore, it is especially of interest to the architect if the circulation, let's say, the traces of this continuity of the circulation is irregular, right? He argues for this irregular continuity of the diagonal circulation. Not that obviously, your project doesn't really depend on, I mean, in some cases you do have these tiny traces of what appears to be handrails, and it's great. And I also wonder, if there are ways in which you really accentuate the idea of the diagonal surface, the oblique surface. There's kind of like life on the oblique. But maybe just to say one more thing about Scott Cohen's thought on the diagonal and irregular handrail. It's too long, so I can't do it here. Like, just because I want to hear the other critics. But the shortest version I can deliver this thought is, if the repeatable typical plan, like architecture, in most cases we have these typical plans, right? But there's an inverse diagram to experimentation and experimental architecture with regards to repeatable cinema versus repeatable architecture. If he cites Andy Warhol's Sleep as the most repeatable frame-to-frame relationship, and yet the most experimental. And he believes that the inverse is true. If the frame-to-frame relationship in typical plan is non-repeatable and atypical. And so if I were to kind of apply that thought, I believe you did it. Right? Like, I think, here, the plate-to-plate relationship, you really like wanted to challenge the repeatability of it. Although in axonometric, it does seem like you do copy and paste a number of times, and I wish you didn't. I feel like if you were to really push this idea of the non-regular kind of life on the oblique. By the way, I say life on oblique. Maybe Ariane and other of your teachers can tell you about Paul Virilio and Claude Parent's oblique principle, which is I guess in the 70s in France, they were really thinking about this idea of a diagonal surface as the not floor, not wall. It eventually became the basis of continuous surface diagram in the 90s, right? Anyway, I'll stop here, but I think it's really overall quite a strong reading of the project of Cohen's position. So it's great. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm going to give a quick translation. صحبت کرد هیمنز راجع به اینکه این چقدر نزدیک به ایده های خود اسکات کوهن، اون پروژه آی بی میوزیم اسکات که صحبتش کردیم اول دوره، که یک سری ویو هایی داشت از جهات مختلف، از اسلاب مختلف و هم خیلی داینامیک بود. دل پروژه مثل همین چیزی که شما دارین. در مورد اینکه اسکات یک لکچری داد فقط راجع به نرده پله، که نرده رو میگه یک خط معماریه که فضامند میشه و سه بعدی میشه و اینکه اون چقدر پتانسیل داره و دید که شما تو کارتون از این هندریل و دست انداز استفاده کردین با همون ظرفیت. و هر حال در مجموع خیلی پروژه مربوط به اسکات کوهن و موفقی میبینه. یه نکته جالبی داشت، گفت تو اکسونومتریک ویو میتونیم اکسونومتریک ویو پروژه رو بیاریم. فکر می‌کنم اون دیاگرام اکسانی بود که کشیده بودی که این سرفس رو داشتن میچرخیدن میومدن بالا. توی این یکی از این ویو ها گفت که من یه سری کپی پیست دیدم تو اینا. فکر می‌کنم کل پروژه نبود، اکسونومتریک فقط اون سطوح شیبدار بود. یه دراینگ خیلی بامزه. آره اینجا اشاره کرد که so this is the one that you mentioned, the copy paste. so گفت اینجا من چند تا احتمالاً اینجا چند تا مجبور شده باشین کپی پیست کرده باشین، یعنی یه سری اتفاقات تکراری داره تو این اسلابا میفته. اگه اینجوری باشه خیلی خوب نیست، قوی تره وقتی که این واقعاً به صورت همون رندوم داره میچرخه میره بالا و اون نظمی که داره اسکات کوهن حرف میزنه ازش ما باید به هم بزنیم تو این تیکه هم اتفاق بیفته. Thanks so much.
آریان جان
میتونیم کامنت ها رو بگیریم بعد آخر یه جواب بگیریم.
بله
وقت رو مدیریت کنیم. خیلی ممنون.
بله حتما. ممنون.
We're trying to collect all the comments and the end get a response so we can manage time.
Yeah, I'll jump in and I'll just say again, I'm constantly blown away by the incredible rigor behind your projects and exceptional just representation methods. I really want to congratulate this team. I loved your diagrams, your models, all of your representation techniques I think are really incredible. This essay, like, he argued that modern architecture is often privileges, transparency, clarity, legibility, but also he talks a lot about that architecture can contain ambiguity and overlaps, distortions, and like multiple reading. So for him, rather than treating like structure, circulation, and closure as separate systems, he sees them as intertwined components that had like a deeper kind of spatial order. So your project reminds me a lot of the Herzog-Demeron's, it's like 1111 Lincoln Road, which is this parking garage that was understood not as infrastructure, but as this like kind of open structural framework that had multiple forms of occupation. So similar to your project, that one also had like parking and retail and fitness, and it had housing kind of at the very top. So it produced a condition where the tectonic logic of the structure became the primary organizer of the space. So what I think you guys can learn from that one is like the exposed concrete frame established that clear structural order, yet it allowed these varying floor heights, these really amazing open edges. And again, the way that it shifted those spatial conditions generated the ambiguity and that kind of multiple reading. So program was not contained within like dedicated objects. It was distributed alongside the framework itself. So like the occupation of the building emerged from the structure rather than being opposed upon it. So I think one lesson that you guys can take away is that your tectonic language can be revealed rather than concealed. I know that you might be referencing the idea of like the hidden core of architecture with your facade, but I actually think that it really could bring itself out. So your structural frame is not simply an internal organizational device, it becomes the architectural expression of the building itself. So that's where I would push. I would push that your structure, enclosure, and facade are not collapsed into a single system, but as treated as these amazing kind of separate things that work in dialogue with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think I just push the legibility through the envelope and the facade as well.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. سبا اشاره کرد به این که چقدر اولا رپرزنتیشن قویه، ترسیمات اینا خیلی عالیه، تعریف کرد ازتون و بعد اشاره کرد به پروژه هرزوگ اند دمورون، پروژه لینکن استریت گاراژی که خیلی معروف پارکینگ بتونی دارن که این سطح شیب داره ارتفاع مختلف داره و این نکته مهم توش امبیگویتی، اون پیچیدگی و سختی یا چندگانگی خوانش پروژه است که ما پروژه میتونیم درست نمی‌فهمیم از خوانش‌های مختلف میتونیم ازش داشته باشیم که از ارزشایی که اون داره. اشاره کرد که تو اون پروژه استراکچری که داره به ما میگه چطوری اینو ساختمون رو ما باید اشغال کنیم و برعکس ما چیزی رو به سازه تحمیل نمی‌کنیم، سازه داره اونو به ما تحمیل می‌کنه که نکته جالبیه. آخرین نکته مهمی که اشاره کرد هم این بود که کاش که میشد یکم از این رو اکسپوز کرد، یعنی متوجه هست سبا که پروژه کانسپتش این هیدن کوره و ما داریم به شکل رادیکال اینو نشون میدیم اینجا با انولوپ بسته، ولی اگه این یه جاهایی حداقل میومد بیرون و به بیرون اکسپوز میشد این اسلبای شما، شاید که اون اکسپرشن ساختمون هم قوی تر خودشون نشون میداد. Thanks so much. Amazing comments. And Amin John.
Yes, thank you for this project. It's a very beautiful project, and the line of thought from the first diagram to the end product is very clear, and everything is making sense. And yes, it is reminding the 1111 Lincoln Park Avenue of Herzog Gomoran. And I would argue that, especially in this project, not seeing the core is kind of the part that probably set it apart from the Lincoln project. So having this thickening facade as a kind of residential, that's a kind of very unique and extreme idea, relationship between a kind of very active core and super thin residential. That was a kind of a part that was a big surprise for me in this project. A lot of the other similarity of the core of this project to both Herzog Gomoran projects and Scott Cohen projects was something that was expected, but I think that part was the part that the authorship of the designers went beyond the kind of just replication of the typologies that they have seen. And especially this plan is super radical. So just kind of seeing the relationship of a city, a gigantic city within a kind of residential space is a radical idea. And within the continuity of circulation, seeing a kind of multi-layer city that activating almost 80% of a plan that is a residential building is just, okay, it's mind-blowing to some extent. Personally, I liked it a lot in that kind of context. And bringing the activity in multiple layers was something that was super successful in this project. The only thing that I would say that if I were you, when I would get to the facade, I would go much more radical in normalizing all of those relationships. The windows in this kind of facade is not representing bedrooms, it's a representation of an idea. You could have easily make it as a kind of radical repetitive system that just produces that kind of representation of that thickened facade instead of just a kind of residential facade, something like that. Otherwise, I would it is achieving all of the promises that it is giving.
Absolutely, I can't agree more about the facade. I wish it was like more like homogeneous, uniform, like radical. And right now we see some sort of hierarchy, but it would be much better without that. من اینم سریع خلاصه کنم نظرات امینم خیلی از پروژه خوشش اومد. به نظرش اتفاقا اون چیزی که این پروژه رو متفاوت میکنه با اون پروژه هرزوگندمرون همین پوسته مسکونی خیلی نازکیه که دارین که خودش یک حرکت رادیکاله و تو پلان میگفت انگار که یک شهره اون وسط اون ماشینا دارن میان دور تا دور خونه. خیلی پلان رو هم دوست داشت. به نظرش پروژه موفقیه. تنها نکته‌ای که داشتش در نهایت این بود که کاش که نما رو به شکل رادیکال‌تر یه دست نشون میدادین. یعنی به جای اینکه حالا پنجره بذارین و شبیه یک نمای تیپیکال بشه که حالا یه جاهایش یه ذره پنجره بیشتر یه جایش یه ذره پنجره کمتر، یه دست مثلا یه نوار همینجوری رپتیتیو بود و بعد ما این تنوع رو در داخل داشتیم. اگه که درست فهمیدم. اوکی، thank you so much. یه جوابی می‌خواستین در مورد نکته هیمنس کنم بده محمد، می‌خوای اونم بگو بریم به نفر بعدی.
اولا اینکه خیلی ممنونم. در مورد اون کیاسی که در مورد پروژه صحبت کردن، ما اسلبا رو تیپ در نظر گرفتیم، اسلبای داخلی رو، ولی هیچ ورودی و هیچ خروجی رو در نظر نگرفتیم و فکر کردیم که اینطوری کیاس وارد پروژه بکنیم توجه به اون حالتی که گفتن و ممنونم واقعا.
یه بار دیگه میگم من متوجه نشدم که
در مورد نظم پروژه صحبت کردن اون اسلبای داخلی، درسته؟ آره. پروژه از اسلب‌های یکسان استفاده کرده برای اینکه ماشین به بالا بیان، ولی هیچ ورودی خروجی رو در نظر نگرفتیم براش که ماشین از کجا وارد اسلبی بشه یا از کجا بتونه خارج بشه. این کیاس ما حالا
Okay. Yeah, there was a quick response about the order that they're arguing that yes, some of these slabs that are making these loop, like the ramps are repetitive, but then they try to basically neutralize the entrance and exit as a way to escape from that. But yeah, they understood the comment and really appreciate everyone. Thanks so much. I think
what I really like in this project is the contrast between periphery and the core. The very specific core and super generic facade. I really like this reverse relationship between the core and the facade, and it is against the decorated shed, the idea of decorated shed. And while in Iran many architects have accepted that the only part of the building that we can work on it is the facade, this project is something that are reminding us the hidden or forgotten core of architecture and its potentials to create alternatives way of dwelling for contemporary buildings.
Absolutely. It's funny, Jimenez mentioned this is more Agadir than Agadir itself. It's Agadir on steroids. So, perfect. Thanks so much, everyone. Next group is representing an essay written by Ahmed Saifman, the essay that everybody is talking nowadays over the past year or so, on 5 points on Lakadam Vasal, and then there were the whole log issue about that. And how do we interpret that approach in this abandoned building in Tehran? We know that Lakatan Vasal themselves, they focus a lot on bringing all the structures to the life and then working with infrastructure as building components and elements and expression of that. So we'll see how the students are working with that. بچه هر وقت آماده این میتونین که پروژه رو بیارین روی سکرین.
Absolutely different thesis. Absolutely different thesis, and it is a very different project.
Okay, yeah, we are waiting for them to connect.
چند دقیقه فرصت بدین گروه بعدی هم آماده میشن.
Okay, they need a couple of minutes. Yeah, it's interesting to see how the the weather is changing in the 21st century, going from the Doppler effect and the hidden core to the more recent moment about Lacaton-Vassal. And then so we have 5 projects in total. After the Lacaton-Vassal, there is a group reflecting on Nader Tehrani's article about the monolithic architecture, which was published in the Mass Timber Studio book that was taught by Jennifer Bonner and Hanif Kara at GSD. So Nader wrote an article about that. And then we'll have the final project will be a reflection on Michael Meredith's article titled After Geometry, published in 2013. So we'll go in that order. I guess the students are ready. Adaptive House, Sajjad, Bita, Farnaz, and I don't see the last name. It's under the Google Meet. So anyway.
Hi, everyone. We deeply appreciate that you're giving us your time to present our project. Okay, we have started.
We have a new critic joining us. Wait a minute.
Can you hear me?
بله. Sure.
Okay. I started again. Hi, everyone. We deeply appreciate that you're giving us your time to present our project. Now we started. In this essay, 5 points from Lacaton and Vassal, Emmett Zeifman argues that the real value of the work of this practice lies in the formulation of reproducible analytical model.
میکروفونتون میوت شد فکر کنم باز دوباره نمیدونم یه چیزی خورد دست.
Okay. Rather than producing new forms, this model begins with a rational acceptance of exciting conditions and focuses on the transformation of process. It is through this very act of transformation that the quality of dwelling is redefined. Within this approach, dwelling quality emerges through the rereading and upgrading of what already exists. Architecture becomes a tool for activating the hidden potentials of the city. An approach that understands modern architecture not as a failure, but as a flexible and responsive framework capable of adapting to contemporary needs. Through this thesis, one can look differently at the current condition of Iran. Cities shaped by modernist planning are today filled with unfinished structural frames and abandoned spaces, the outcome of economic crisis and the reduction of architecture to mere building production. The unfinished concrete frame in Ekbatan neighborhood was also produced within this modernist logic. It is a form of capital that has been removed from the cycle of urban life. Not because of any structural incapacity, but because of an excessive dependence on market logic. At a time when the housing crisis, rising construction costs, and declining purchasing power are all placing pressure on the city, this culture of building production continues to insist on the completion of buildings and the delivery of housing units through costly and speculative aesthetics. The main problem in such projects is not the absence of form, but the inability to reactive these structures. In other words, the inability to return forms of capital that have been excluded from the cycle of urban life. What requires reconsideration is not further production, but the reintegration of these unused resources into the process of dwelling. We therefore approach this condition not as a failure, but as the starting point of our thinking and design. Instead of completing the structural frame in a routine manner according to the logic of housing market, this project challenges a fundamental assumption. Abandoned sites are not signs of failure, but opportunities to rethink patterns of dwelling. In this view, the existing structure is not a burden left behind, but a platform to the insertion of new and flexible modes of inhabitation. In order to move beyond a speculative understanding of construction towards a life-oriented approach, our proposed model is based on 5 principles. Now our principles. First principle, the unfinished structure as rentable elevated ground. Every unfinished structure is a potential infrastructure for urban dwelling, and every slab can be understood as a piece of rentable elevated ground. The responsibility for reactivative is no longer placed on a single owner, but is distributed among residents, each of whom rents at a defined area. Based on rental rents, a defined area. This system releases the land again when a resident leaves, making it available for the next inhabitant. It creates a living cycle rather than a frozen condition of ownership. This protocol can be adapted to different models of property, whether private, public, or cooperative. Second principle, user agency through spatial flexibility. Each rented area is divided into 2 parts. The first is a compact fixed zone that contains the essential infrastructure of a dwelling and is provided to the resident as a ready-to-use core. The second is an open zone that allows the living space to expand through the addition of standardized prefabricated units. These units can accommodate different functions according to the needs of residents. This system enables 2 layers of flexibility. The first is the internal flexibility of the dwelling. Residents can place, move, add, or remove the standardized units within the open zone, thereby defining the relationship of their home to light, shade, facade, and open space. The second layer concerns the boundary between the open areas of each dwelling. Movable partitions allow residents either to divide the space into independent units or, when opened, to transform it into a shared and collective space. In the conventional model, the use of space is predetermined and residents are forced to adapt themselves to it. This project reverses that relationship. Third principle. Urban commons as, wait a minute. Now third principles. Urban commons are productive spaces between the building and the city. By removing the perimeter walls and connecting the open space of the building to the urban fabric, the building is transformed from a closed island into an active urban node. These semi-public spaces allow residents to access part of their everyday needs within a familiar environment and in continuity with collective life. In conventional construction, shared spaces are often reduced to the smallest possible area because they cannot be directly sold. The solution proposed by this project is to redefine the role of the commons, space that serve both the residents and the life of the city. Operating at the threshold between the two, they are transformed from consumptive spaces into social and urban capital. Now, fourth principle. Passive climatic strategies. Is it true? The spaces added to the building are not design accesses. They can operate as instruments of climatic regulation. The strategy of prosthesis forms these spaces by attaching lightweight elements to the existing structure. Corrugated sheets, scaffolding, transparent envelopes, and other materials that the residents of Tehran have long used spontaneously on their balconies. These prosthetic additions function as winter gardens during the cold season and as devices for ventilation during the summer. At the same time, they activate intermediate collective spaces. Next. The cheapest and lightest of these elements are not weaknesses, but the very conditions that make the model reproducible. The final principle, 5 principle, material honesty. Reducing cost, reducing carbon, producing a new aesthetic. The removal of unnecessary finishes and the use of cheap and raw material achieve 3 aims at once. Reducing construction costs, reducing the consumption of high carbon materials, the revealing the formative logic of the building that is usually hidden beneath expensive layers of finishing. This material honesty produces a new aesthetic, one whose authenticity does not derive from decoration, but from the clarity of structural logic. It is a response shaped by the pressures of economic inflation, yet one that architecture can actively embrace and transform into a spatial potential. This project is not the description of a completed building, but the articulation of a living system. Each layer is shaped according to a specific logic, and together these layers produce a flexible and dynamic whole. The project consists of different components, including shared spaces attached to the facade, a lightweight additional floor on the rooftop, and and unprogrammed spaces for each housing unit. This approach gives architectural legitimacy to the everyday routines of residents and attempts to create a flexible architecture that users can adapt to their changing lifestyle and needs. The additional spaces, without predetermined functions, allow diverse qualities and scenarios of dwelling to emerge. Alongside its attempt to provide a platform for affordable housing and spatial justice, the project defines architecture not as a fixed form, but as a framework for growth, change, and adaptation to the real everyday lives of its residents. The project proposes a limited but precise horizon. It shows that Tehran's unfinished structures are not necessarily problems. They can become platforms. If this logic is transformed into a reproducible protocol, it can be applied to any abandoned structural frame in the city, and return it to the cycle of urban life. The question it raises is this: can dwelling be separated from fixed ownership? Can the city contain platforms that are neither sold nor abandoned? Its limitations, however, are also clear. This model requires institutional will. It requires an owner who is willing not to sell the structure, but to bring it back into the cycle of dwelling. In the speculative culture of construction in Iran, this is far from simple. This project is neither an ideology nor a final solution. It is a proposal for beginning a different conversation about what dwelling in Tehran could become. Finished.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We open it to the jury. As you see, it's a very sober project in the days that Iran is squeezed economically, but also politically. We have so many abandoned buildings, but also we have so many bombed buildings. So that they can come up with a formula as a response to this dire situation.
So if I may jump on this because of shortage of time, it's very as the same as the other project that we saw so far. It's very rich in graphic and representation and the line of thought. And the part that was very interesting for me was the challenge of definition of kind of the finish of a project or housing in the context of bureaucratic infrastructure of a system, something like we are dealing with everywhere around the world. That, for example, they want a certification of they want to understand when the building is finished, but when you democratize the kind of life of the building and the kind of expansion of the building through this kind of a strategy, inherently the main challenge is the bureaucratic system that needs to approve this kind of projects. And this project rightfully walks in that very thin line of where and when the building and by who the building is being finished, and what is the minimum infrastructure that you need to provide in this kind of context that you call it habitable, without somehow being trapped by the kind of bureaucracy of certification of occupancies and finish of the projects. In that context, it is very successful solution for an existing structure to some extent cutting or building the part that you can and leaving the rest for the residents and the users to expand and use as they wish. I think there were few parts that I didn't understand the necessity of them. To some extent, I think the pods for me was a big question. I would say that why we need extra pods under a kind of roof, that kind of outdoor space can be occupied as wish, and the way that that can be used can be much more diverse than being filled with a pod that is, to some extent, in my eyes, it's enforced. But other than that, the way that, for example, the skin, definition of the skin, the materiality, the way that the concept of climate activity of the building, all of them came to one solution that was very successful approach altogether for me.
Thank you very much. خیلی خلاصه بگم، امین خیلی با پروژه موافق بود، خوشش اومد و تایید کرد که تو این شرایط، مخصوصا شرایط بوروکراسی موجود و اینا، اینکه ما دنبال راه حلی باشیم که با کمترین زیرساخت و تأسیسات ممکن یک سازه نیمه کاره رو بتونیم قابل زندگی کنیم و این اکسپرشن رو ازش در بیاریم، خیلی حرکت موفقیه و خلاصه پروژه‌ایه که به این چیزا فکر شده. نکته‌ای که داشتش در انتها این بود که این پادهایی که روی سقف ما داریم شاید ضروری نبود، شاید اگر که اینا فضای باز بود به جای این خیلی فلکسیبل تر بود و بهتر میشد ازش استفاده کرد تا ما این رو محدود کنیم به پادهایی در بالا قرار گرفته. یعنی به نظرش یکم به زور چرخونده شده بود در پروژه و الا به صورت کلی مثبت بود کامنت. خیلی ممنونم. Next.
I really like the imagery that's produced here. Like, I think the drawings are really nice. The renders are great. I think, especially the model renders, I think in the context of an entirely digital environment, I think digitally representing something physical, tactile to scale, to me, that's also very interesting. I've long thought about, also, by the way, it's really interesting for me anyway, it's really interesting that I'm able to hear AI in the writing. I don't know how it is that I'm starting to be able to pick up how AI writes. It's not your fault. You're doing this in English, and I totally get it. However, and we all use AI. It's not a problem, okay? I'm not trying to say it's a problem. However, I do suggest that if you do AI, take the effort to turn it into your own voice afterwards. I think AI can give you a really great basis to start something, but if you don't turn it into your own voice, I think, again, it's not just me. A lot of people are starting to be able to hear it, how AI writes. So that's one recommendation I have. I don't know, like, I think this is because part of what we're responding is your work, but also the let's say the theory behind the work, right? I mean, I know how to think about Bob and Sarah's writing, like Scott Cohen's also very familiar to me. Ahmed Zeifman's work is also I'm super familiar with, and it so happens I disagree with his position, and therefore it's not your fault that I disagree with his position. It's just that you are doing it. Maybe it's good that since you're doing it so well that I'm finding things that I disagree with. What do I disagree with? To turn something into a formula. I get that, with every generation and every wave, there has to be some type of structure around the way we think, and whether or not people formulaically postulate the structure around the ways in which we think into bullet points that we can apply. Once we apply it, it'll like the mass application of it would make it for me stale very quickly. It'll become so that's one part of that I disagree with, right? The other part of it is there's a attempt to equate aesthetics and ethics, which is so dangerous. It is so dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Well, if I were to say, listen, if you wear black, then ethically you're probably good. Or if I were to say, if you're a female person and you put a veil on your head, then ethically you're okay. It's not that far away from this type of thing. You know, I always, and it's not just Emmett's position but he did write this, right? He wrote in the log piece, he totally used the word ethics and aesthetics as synonymous. And again, it's not your, you didn't come up with it. You just read it and applied it. And I get that, you know, during times of economic despair and war, we need something. You know, I get that we need something, and then we need something that feels right. We all want to do the right thing. I want to do the right thing too. It's just that the nuances of reading what is right, and to say that this is absolutely right if it looks like this, for me, I'm still thinking about it, and I just feel like, you know, in a forum like this, it's probably helpful to share a thought like that. So, but really wonderful work, really.
Thanks so much. Let me quickly translate. These are very fair point, and I'm sure some of the students, including Yasser, also will agree with what you mentioned. It would be a good discussion to have if we have time about this. Not only the ethics equals aesthetics, but also, is it some sort of limiting the potential of form in architecture with some ethical excuses? This other thing that comes to my mind as a criticism. But let me quickly translate, and then maybe Saba has more comments about this too. نکته که گفت ایمنز این بود که خب پروژه رو خوب کشیدید، مخصوصا اون جاهایش که ماکت رو رندر گرفتین خیلی کمک میکنه. من که ما توی فرمت دیجیتال داریم ریویو میکنیم پروژه ها رو، و ماکت عادت دارن آدما اینجا همیشه ماکت جلوشون باشه وقتی پروژه حرف میزنن. این که شما اینا رو رندر گرفتین خیلی خوبه و خواهش میکنم که همینجوری تصاویر رو بچرخونین، همه رو ببینیم تصمیماتتون رو. یک نکته که گفتش این بود که من خودم مخالفت تئوریک با نوشته امت من دارم و به خوبی باهاش آشنام، چون بحث روز الان اینجا، و این نقدی که من میکنم نقد شما نیست. شما امت من رو دنبال کردین به درستی، اتفاقا چون خیلی خوب اونو دنبال کردین من این نقد رو میتونم بهش پروژه شما داشته باشم. و اون اینه که میگه اولا من با این روی کرد که ما بیایم یک سری ارزش‌ها رو به شکل یک سری بولت پوینت در بیاریم و اینا رو به صورت یونیورسال به همه جا اپلای کنیم، با این مخالفم. این یک جورایی نتیجه خوبی شاید واسه معماری نداشته باشه که ما قانون درست کنیم و 1 2 3 4 5 و بگیم که همه ساختمان‌ها باید اینو دنبال کنن. میتونه خیلی تنگ نظرانه باشه. و نکته دومش این بود که معماری اگر که بره به سمتی که زیبایی شناسی برابر بشه با اخلاق، میتونه کار خطرناکی باشه، برای اینکه اون وقت یک سری فرم هایی که غیر از اینن ممکنه غیر اخلاقی برآورد بشه. باید همیشه ما زیبایی شناسی اخلاق رو جدا بکنیم. مثل میمونه که بگیم هر کی لباس مشکی بپوشه آدم خوبیه، هر کی سفید بپوشه خوب نیست، یا نمیدونم مثالای دیگه. اینه که نقدی که داشت نقد ساختاری بود به صحبت‌های امت زایفمن. حالا میشه شاید در موردش در ادامه با صحبت کنیم. بذاریم کامنت سوار هم داشته باشیم. سوا جان، what do you think?
Yeah, I really agree with the comments thus far, and also wish we could elaborate on Menace's point. But in the spirit of the project that's here, I really do want to commend its resolution in such a short amount of time. I think you've been able to propose something that could be seen as a case study for cities like Tehran, where this rapid construction produces so many underutilized or vacant buildings. So I think also it really links maybe to Lafitane and Basal and their idea that generosity can come without exorbitant costs. So I really do feel that your project is generous in the way that it's providing space for inhabitation. I think one thing I would push further for yours is that relationship of the architecture to both environmental performance, but also to the kind of existing frame itself. So your climate systems right now perhaps act as attachments, but you could really just think deeper about what that organization and spatial structure can do on its own. So how does your plan produce cross ventilation? How do those sliding partitions, thresholds, voids, maybe layered spaces help mediate some of those environmental conditions? I also think maybe in the spirit of Lakaton and basalt, how could that structural frame become more supportive for flexibility and adaptation? Like right now, your frame is your permanent element, and some of the things that you're adding, your interventions, are also a little bit rigid and have this one-to-one relationship with the frame. So maybe think about, if your project is about flexibility, what kinds of temporary systems can it host? So I would think about your units expanding or contrasting through a modular logic, but again, not just one bay, maybe it expands through multiple, but also maybe these curtain systems, partitions, your environmental devices, your storage systems, how can they be attached to the frame and reconfigured over time? But also maybe how can your walls operate independently from your structural grid? So perhaps they're moving diagonally, or they're occupying the space between bays. So I think your project establishes a really strong fixed framework, but I'd really love to see how maybe it could support a wider range of temporary occupations, a little bit more flexibility in its domestic arrangements. And I'd love to see that everyday life, or those forms of everyday life that you're talking about, really be shown in your drawings, and then again represented in your facade as well. So I think flexibility in your projects should not just be about open space, but about that productive relationship with what is permanent, and then what can change.
Thank you so much. بچه پوینت صبا هم راجع به این بود که اولا به لاکاتون واصال اشاره کرد و در مورد اینکه فقط براشون مهمه که فضا بدن و جنرس باشن، دست و دلباز باشن توی پروژه ها، و این یک ارزش تو پروژه هاشون و شما دارین به این فکر میکنین. این نکته مهمی که داشت در مورد میزان خشکی و انعطاف پروژه بود. اینکه ما با وجود اینکه شما مثلا یه یونیتای مثل این دارین که زیرش چرخ گذاشتین، اینا میتونن حرکت کنن تو فضا، ولی کل معماری خیلی تابع فریم استراکچر هست، خیلی قاب سازه‌ای داره، همه چیز رو سازماندهی میکنه برای شما و کمتر این رو شما به هم زدین. اونطوری که من میفهمم نکته سوا اینه که خوب بود که ما میتونستیم یک جاهای این رو بیشتر بشکنیم، فلکسیبل تر باشیم، چه توی نما و چه توی داخل پروژه، و انعطاف بیشتری به خرج بدیم تا اینکه کاملا از این سازه تبعیت کنیم. Right?
Yeah, maybe one project, before we move on for you guys, is this project it's called San Remo. I'll send it to Ariane, which maybe if you look at the plan, your project really reads very horizontally in the plan. But what that project does really successfully is develop this incredible cross-section in the plan. And it really just operates in multiple directions. So I think that might be a good way to, as Ariane and John was saying, like interrupt the plan a little bit more strongly.
Yeah, it would be wonderful to see. Sabo has just recently finished teaching a housing studio at Cal Poly, so she knows so many good references. Definitely, I need to ask more about that. Thanks so much for all the comments. We have two more projects. Yasser John, do you want to mention anything? Closing comment before we move on to the next?
Thank you. I think it is a very important and difficult discussion, the problem of ethic when we want to think about architecture in these ways. I think that the core concept is about the legitimacy. If an architectural building tries to legitimate itself by ethical issues, it is something absolutely wrong in my perspective. But I don't think necessarily that if any architectural project seeks for something good for public, because of this, it is wrong. if it can legitimate itself by radically questioning the historical and traditional assumption of architecture about the concept of facade, about the boundaries, about the concept of mechanical air conditioning, about the concept of many things. Yes, I think if architecture can legitimate itself by its own potentials and its own questions, it is not necessarily an ethical issue. But I think it is the opposite side of the hidden core of architecture, following the Saba's comments. They think that it is not necessarily, we don't have to challenge the slabs because of creating something new. Instead, we can challenge many concepts, many other concepts, for example, air conditioning and its relation to the concept of dwelling. I think there are a lot of cliches about air conditioning, and I think air conditioning has its own politics that drives many things about the culture of buildings in contemporary architecture, and it is what I like in Lakaton Vassal's project, but I know it is a very challenging topic.
Yeah, and it's very against the grain of the current situation in Iran, you know, to just give you a little bit of background, like despite all the economic issues, Iran's current architecture is occupied by all these new classical buildings, which are very ornate, and they use like stone and they carve it and they call it the Roman facade. And then from the inside, it's not a very luxury project, but the face, the cosmetics really matter, and they spend so much money on that, and it's completely unnecessary. And this project in that context is kind of against that grain. Whereas maybe if you see it in Zurich, then it's like another typical building that looks like an oil refinery. You know? So I think in that context is kind of radical culturally trying to talk about necessities in the project. Okay, thanks so much for all the comments. Let's move on.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, Saba put the link for the housing project here. It's in Munich.
I think one of the specific point of this project, which is different with the Zeifman essay, was the idea of mobility and temporality. I think it is something really radical that reminds me some Archizoom and Super Studios ways and ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting issue. Like that sort of architecture wants to be radical, but sometimes it tends to be more conservative somehow by limiting architecture, but by bringing back more of Super Studio, you know, openness or like more visionary ideas to that. I think it's a way to break away from that. So the next one is around this essay written by Nada Tehrani called Blank Shots. This is the title of the essay, Blank Shots, monolithic desire and laminar inevitabilities. That was published in the Mass Timber book by Jennifer Bonner, Hanif Kara, about the studio they taught at GST, and it's about the fact that Nader was defending the idea of architects wants to have these monolithic buildings, everything made of same material, although current construction realities are pushing us away from that, and they're making us to have so many layers glued on top of each other. So what if we get that as an ethical question and try to push architecture to its limits to see how much we can do with the minimum material used, doing everything from infrastructure to facade to aesthetics, finish. So we will see what this group has done. بچه‌ها میتونین شروع کنیم.
Probably Amin's favorite project.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Of course. So, my name is Mohammed. We're a group of 4: Mohammed, Nazanin, Helen, and Negin. Let's see if I can. All right. So, in the essay Blank Shots, Monolithic Desires and Laminar Inevitabilities, Nader Tehrani argues that architecture can resist the fragmentation of contemporary layered building systems by deliberately committing to a singular material and tectonic logic. This approach allows architecture to regain a measure of its diminished agency. From this perspective, form is not a predetermined design decision, but rather the gradual accumulation and evolution of a constructive part's intrinsic capabilities. If architecture today begins from the logic of material and construction, rather than relying on image, facade, and integration of autonomous systems, it can reestablish a closer relationship between design and execution and reclaim a more active role in shaping the building environment. When you go through the site, you'll encounter 2 distinctive architecture identities: the Bime on the bottom, the Bime neighborhood, which represents the conventional building method in Iran, and the Ekbatan housing project that was constructed with tunnel formwork structure system and precast concrete panels covering the facade. The structure itself is a generic domino diagram, which is covered with precast panels similar to Ekbatan's facade system. After closer inspections, we understood that the panels are connected to the structure via steel belts and bracings. Further, steel has been used as wall posts for interior divisions stability as well. Instead of, let me just go through these slides. Yeah. Instead of completing a generic frame structure through the addition of new layers and designing a distinctive facade, this project seeks to derive its design logic from developing a single tectonic grain. What is typically regarded as a secondary element in residential construction, subordinate to the structure, is here transformed into the primary agent of architectural formation. In other words, the conventional relationship between part and whole is reversed. Instead of components serving a predetermined image, the overall project emerges through the repetition, aggregation, and evolution of generative tectonic grain. This approach can be understood in relation to the intellectual legacy of Samper, who believed that architecture originated not from abstract form, but from material technique and construction processes. Within this project, the tectonic grain is not merely an instrument for producing form, but also carries the capacity to organize space, habitation, and construction simultaneously. This shift is not merely an aesthetic choice. It has tangible consequences. By reducing the number of construction layers and consolidating multiple functions within a single system, the project minimizes construction complexity and enhances control over the building process. In today's economic climate, where construction costs and coordinating specialized trades pose significant challenges in residential development, this issue becomes particularly. Stronger cohesion emerges between the structure envelope and spatial organization, ensuring that the experience of dwelling is deeply intertwined with the construction logic. Instead of encountering a collection of autonomous layers, the inhabitant is confronted with an architecture whose special qualities are directly derived from the processes that shape the building space. The layered system that characterizes the contemporary constructions are not merely architectural choices that can be overcome through design intent alone. Economic constraints, technical requirements, building regulations, investor expectations, dependence on existing structures, and the current culture of construction in Iran all limit the possibility of fully realizing an aspiration towards a monolithic desire. Furthermore, the extension of a single medium logic across every dimension of a project inevitably encounters its own challenges and contradictions. Therefore, or a definitive solution for the future of housing in Iran. For this reason, the project aims to maintain a critical distance between aspiration and reality. Its value lies less in providing a final solution, but rather in rehearsing a series of questions. Is it possible, with existing conditions and without entirely rejecting prevailing modes of construction, to recover a portion of architecture's diminished agency? Can the development of a tectonic logic reduce the distance between design and execution? What if architecture identity emerges not through image, but through the relationship between material, construction, and habitation? And can contemporary residential projects generate alternative qualities that are derived directly from the logic of construction itself? Thank you so much.
Thank you for the great presentation. Very clear and quick. I think it was clear that it was not Muhammad's first time presenting something in English, so thanks for that.
Of course not.
Yeah, he has studied abroad, so thank you for the great project. So
thank you.
Yeah, ready to take comments.
Oh, I really love the presentation. What? Sorry?
Go ahead. I think you both wanted to start. So
sorry.
But go ahead.
Wait, who go ahead?
Jimenez, go ahead, and then
Okay,
Saba will. I heard your voice first. So.
Okay. Yeah, no, for sure. Really fantastic presentation. It was very articulate, thoughtful, and the drawings are super gorgeous. I also thought the kind of you were able to paint a very nuanced way of thinking about things as things fall apart, as we reconstruct things. You know, like what could be a material logic, but also ideological logic. You know, that composite with each other, and maybe even an economic one, right? Like all of them together. So I thought this was very nice. All the drawings are just. I mean, I think. I mean, I'm doing it a disservice by using the word competency level. I think it's just super high. The quality just super high. So I would like you all to know that I think it's really impressive that you guys are able to execute at such a high level. It's really great. I'm thinking about Nader's writing, his position, and I think, you know, what I really appreciate about Nader, like, I don't know, I'm sure all of you, like, Nader's maybe the most famous Iranian abroad, no? Like in architecture. In
addition to Farsi, these two are
in addition to Farsi, yeah, these are the two. And the thing about Nader's position here, you know, I find it interesting that we're going from Emma Zeitman's position to Nader's position here, because, you know, there's almost a consistency in what Emma's arguing for, which is let's reveal the tectonic, let's reveal the members, right? Architecture is made of, you know, like ready off-the-shelf objects. Why don't we reveal that? I think that's one. I get that position. And in some ways, Nader's position is much closer to Bob and Sarah's. You know, like I think, and especially Bob, when you think about the singularity of the object from the outside, but complexity from the inside, you know, what are ways in which we can, you know, we make a foam model or some kind of like massing model out of wood, maybe the stages of work from when we go from like, if it's a big building, we go from like 1 to 500 or 1 to 250. I think the massing is first, and we don't know the details of anything. And sometimes when you make this massing model, it's so beautiful, and you're thinking, how do I build that building as a single monolithic thing, knowing that it is impossible to build architecture out of even cast in place concrete. It's a singular material, but the seam to seam relationship of the formwork, you are always able to read the seams, right? How can we do a thing that is monomaterial, monolithic, and what are the magic tricks that we can use so that the seams look very on purpose, deliberate, and I think I feel like I totally resonate with this question and this struggle. What I find it's really good that we're looking at this slide now. What I find especially interesting is that like earlier I said massing, right? Like the monolithic massing, meaning 3-dimensional. But here there's always a relationship between the 2-dimensional, like meaning the facades where the elevation panels are 2-dimensional. And how do we composite the 2-dimensional monolithic, and what is that in concert with the 3-dimensional monolithic? Anyway, I'm really impressed by your synthesis of his writing and how you translated it in the work. I'm also kind of curious because it seems like I'm in work with Nadir for a long time. Maybe I'll stop, and I would love to hear what the other people have to say. But such wonderful work, fantastic.
Thank you, Jimenez. I'm gonna translate quickly. خیلی تعریف کرد هیمنز، دیگه نمیدونه چطوری بیشتر از این تعریف کنه از پروژه. با نهایت هم ترسیماتتون رو خیلی دوست داشت و به نظرش خیلی خوب انجام شده بود. هم نظر کانسپچوال پروژه هماهنگ بود با کاری که به نظر هیمنز میخواد نادر ازش دفاع کنه، به این معنی که ما چطوری پروژه رو به صورت مونولیت و یک سنگ نشون بدیم با وجود چالش‌هایی که داره، چه ماجیک تریک‌هایی استفاده کنیم، چه کلک‌هایی استفاده کنیم در تکتونیکمون که بتونیم ما اینو به شکل مونولیتیک بخونیم. کار سختیه، میگه حتی بتون شما وقتی قالب می‌ریزین اون درز قالب‌ها رو می‌بینیم و باعث میشه که اون ریدینگ یک پارچه و مونولیت رو نداشته باشیم. و در نهایت به نظرش یک ربطی هم داره، شباهتی هم داره با ایده‌های باب سومول از جهت اینکه میگه باب سومول خیلی دو بعدی می‌بینه معماری رو و اون پنل که شما دارین استفاده میکنین هم یک پنل 2 بعدیه، ولی در نهایت با کنار هم گذاشتن اینا شما تونستین یک آبجکت مونولیت 3 بعدی درست کنین و این به نظرش یک کار جالب و بسیار ارزشمند. Thanks so much. Next, Saba, you wanna jump in?
Yeah, I will also echo Jimenez's points. Like, this is an incredibly beautiful project, and I would rather see more of it than speak myself. So I really want to commend both the resolution and the graphics. It's just a really beautiful project. I'd love to be there. And I think Tehrani's points about architecture being something that's assembled rather than sculptured, and kind of looking at how different systems come together to produce projects. I think for him, he also argues that the challenge is to create work where systems remain legible and your construction remains legible. So your building should reveal how it's made rather than conceal its assembly behind a finished image. And I think your project already kind of begins to do this, but I would encourage pushing that further. Like, I'd actually really love to see how can that construction logic become more visible in the architecture itself. Besides, like, beyond revealing how your building is constructed, I would be interested in revealing the sequence of construction and intervention and the different life cycles that could be embedded within this project. Like, if you think about it, housing is never static. Some of your elements are permanent, some are replaceable, some are adaptable, and some things change over the years. Even your material wears through all of these different, conditions that are happening in Iran right now. So how can those different temporal conditions become part of your architectural language? So Tehrani asks how design language becomes material, assembled, constructed, and I would love to see that process within your project made more explicit. Like, how is the project being put together, and how maybe is that life cycle something that adds to the way that the residents are living? How is it like evolving over time, and how are these different maybe phasings of your project in its different systems supporting that change and adaptation? So for me, your representation shows your final building, but I would love to see maybe how that logic and that assembly and really just that life cycle and timelines of not just building construction, but also housing evolves, and how that kind of fits with it more.
Thank you. سبا هم گفت به نظرش بسیار پروژه زیباییه. نکته‌ای که داشت در مورد این بود که خوب میشد که ما میتونستیم چرخه حیات این ساختمان رو نشون بدیم و مثل حالت تایملاین مانندی، نه فقط در بحث تکتونیک لزوما و کنار هم گذاشتن همه این المان ها، بلکه وقتی که از این ساختمان استفاده میشه و چه مراحلی طی میشه، چه جوری میشه بعدش. یعنی ما بیشتر داریم اینجوری که من میفهمم اسکلت فیزیکی ساختمان رو میبینیم ولی زندگی توش رو خیلی نمیبینیم هنوز. و داشتین شما یادم یه ترسیماتی داشتین از داخل فضاها و اینا بعد از سکونت که خیلی ندیدیمشون تو این ارائهتون، ولی به هر حال این کامنت سبا بود. Thanks so much. Next, John, what do you think?
Thanks for this project. It's a very beautiful project, very well represented all together. Again, the question of laminar architecture and performance, and something that Nader does in the concept of delamination, is something that he's been doing it for probably like 20 years. And the challenge is the performance part of that, more than the materiality of the solution. How material can, because again, that's a difference between the construction system in Iran versus construction system here. In US, you have layers of performative materials. For example, starting from exterior of the building to interior, you might get to tens of layers of performance and different material performances that they do different things to their best without contributing to the whole as a kind of a concept. That's the part that Nader tries to separate himself from the construction methods and translate the construction method to architectural thinking. So for me, the biggest question is performance and the modes of materiality. For example, if you are using concrete, on top of concrete, the image might be unified, but does it work? Probably not anymore. And that's a part that his essay is somehow trying to open the kind of can of worms. Say, okay, we cannot do that anymore. We cannot do that because of a lot of things, because of climate change, because of all of those issues with the performance of materials, because of much more knowledge that we have about the way that the building works and the quality of a space, quality of air, and how architecture in this condition can overcome all of those technicality and become architecture again. And again, the question lies in the concept of performance and modes of the materiality. For example, if you're using, I really like the way that, for example, you use the concrete as a kind of a shading device. But first, why concrete? And when you are dealing with ruin condition, the concrete is merely a kind of answer to a unifying system, not a kind of performative kind of aspect of the material. So again, it's a very challenging question, and it's much more about the discipline of architecture in this era and the way that you are dealing with different trades, different materials, and is not anymore at your command, and how you get the command of the system and understand the system and do it differently to the way that you generate a kind of unified architecture out of layerings of materiality, and the way that is becoming the unifying system for you again. So again, in terms of representation and aspiration, the project is absolutely beautiful. But the part I would say that you could push further was the part that you would analyze the material in different modes of performances, saying, okay, this is a same material, but I am doing it differently to achieve different modes of performances here. And if the concrete works for you, that's perfect. But you are not tied to have a concrete because the existing construction was concrete. That's merely a ruin there that you are attaching something to it, and the logic might be totally different. So that's a part that I think might have had a little bit more thoughts or diagrams. Maybe you have some thoughts, but showing different modes of performances, something like that.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Wonderful point. Let me quickly translate. نکته‌ای که بچه امین میگه اینه که پروژه از نظر representation پروژه زیباییه، ولی صحبتی که نادر داره تو مقاله‌اش و چیزی که سالها داره دنبال میکنه در مورد اینه که از نظر عملی ما از نظر پرفورمنس و فنی چطوری این نما رو ببندیم که کارم بکنه. یعنی فقط بحثی نیستش که این مونولیت به نظر بیاد. الان ما اینجا بتون روی بتون گذاشتیم، ولی میدونیم توی ساختمان واقعی ما لایه‌های زیادی داریم. لایه عایق داریم، لایه رطوبتی داریم، نمیدونم یه جای رین اسکرین داریم. این اصلا آیا این ساندویچی که ما مجبوریم درست کنیم به خاطر شرایط اصل مشکلیه که نادر در موردش نوشته که قبلا ما با هم در موردش صحبت کردیم تو کلاس. و اینکه شما شاید جا داشت اون ماجیک تریک هایی که هیمنز بهش اشاره کرد رو بیشتر نشون میدادین یا روش کار میکردین که شما دارین چی کار میکنین که نظر فنی همین جواب بده و ساختمان مونولیت بمونه. یعنی یکم بیشتر زوم کنیم رو اون لایه حداقل بیرونی ساختمون و بتونین اونو یه جور دیفاین کنین. به قول امین اگه بتون داره براتون کار میکنه و ما ثابت کنیم که آقا این لایه ها داره برام کار میکنه. اینکه به عنوان یک وسیله برای سایه انداختن ازش استفاده کردیم به نظر امین جالبه، ولی باید نه از نظر فنی یکم قابل دفاع‌تر باشه اون پوسته ساختمون، اینجوری که من میفهمم. Yasser John, do you want to add any comment? Yeah, I think.
Thank you. The comments were great, and following the jury's comments, what I like in Tehran is a statement is that while in contemporary architecture talking about materiality and tectonic is only related or under the concept of phenomenology, Zumthor's phenomenology and craftsmanship, Nader takes back the concept of materiality and tectonic and turns it into an intellectual issue in architecture and something disciplinary, and especially with reconnecting the concept of materiality to Zemper. I really like this approach, and I think it is really a smart way to rediscovering the significance of material in architecture and in contemporary discourse. Thank you.
Thanks, Yasser. Okay, we can move on to the next project. Yeah,
thank you very much. I just wanted to say thank you for the comments. Great comments, by the way. And I think if my group mates would accept, I would like to further the project with ourselves based on those comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, in Iran, we have a long tradition of monolithic buildings. I mean, everything was built of some sort of bricks, inside and outside, ornament, shelves. Whatever we had in the building was only this material, plus sometimes glass when we had it later on. So it would be interesting to see in today's day how that could be reinterpreted. It's a very difficult technical question. I mean, I don't think there's an easy answer to that. We can make things look monolithic, but in reality, I don't know if we can actually make monolithic buildings anymore. Maybe Louis Kahn was the last person as architect who was able to do things like that. No thermal bridging issues. He didn't need to pass ARE. So the last project is reflecting on an essay by Michael Meredith called After Geometry, published in 2013 in AD magazine, which was at that time was all about digital movement and parametricism. And Michael's stance is he was considered also a digital architect back in the days, but at the same time he was critical of that, and maybe it was a time that the post-digital was already starting, or it was already there. Jimenez might know it better. He's close to it. So, but this article, they will briefly say what he's defending in the after geometry. He's also reflecting on the field condition. So we will see. Bacha, the floor is yours, please. Go ahead, شروع کنیم.
Hi, can you hear me?
بله, please.
Yes, I'm Omid with Aydin and Nafisa. According to Michael Meredith in After Geometry, by fragmenting the architectural object within an intentionally low-resolution digital environment and embracing accident rather than precision, architecture can become less serious. The ironic attitude stands against a recurring mode of architectural thinking that repeatedly rises in new forms, each time promising yet another universal truth. So, what should we do with this unfinished skeleton in the middle of Ekbatan? First of all, what we are proposing is neither universal nor permanent. It's a situated and temporary position. The age of superheroes is over. We have to accept that the architect's logic can no longer arrive at a single certain answer. Perhaps we can no longer escape reality. But simply accepting it's not enough either. In today's world, where media plays on an undeniable role, the representational and media-based dimension of architecture has become even more important, and perhaps even more social than architecture itself. Yet, we want our architecture to escalate between reality and imagination, between logic and irrationality. Within the predefined architectural boxes that have become normalized in Iran's architecture, and within the common sense that is continuously reproduced in our schools of architecture, how can we deliberately distance ourselves and propose something different? How can we fragment architectural form, shift our attention from the final seductive objects to the design process itself, and destabilize the final form? How can we embrace the process that is intentionally non-digital, grounded in accidents rather than control, distancing itself from absolute claims and adopting a cooler attitude? This unpredictable, although not entirely unpredictable, space may become open to events and programs that have no place within rigid architectural structure. And let's see in another way. Perhaps among these fragmented volumes, we can become more aware of difference and instead of avoiding it, learn to engage with everything that architecture has traditionally tried to exclude. We began to observing and documenting and that we see in sites and already existed on the site. Among all the elements we encountered, cars become the most important subject for us. Our attention was drawn to vehicles occupying in the sites. We started by documenting them, connecting them to another, and identifying their different brands. By mapping this relationship, we created a network that revealed pattern within the site. Looking at the larger context, we recognize two adjacent neighborhoods. Bime with Varzish, a street running between them and containing our sites. Within Ekbatan, we observe two different layers of activity. The first consisted of formal programs such as housing, commercial space, and other official functions. The second was an informal layer that repeatedly appeared throughout the neighborhood despite never having a designated place of its own. The very condition that makes the site problematic became the logic behind our programmatic strategy. Instead of resisting the existing urban reality, we embraced it. Parking was placed alongside the busiest and most congested streets. Commercial programs were positioned opposite the existing commercial blocks, and our own retail space extended towards Ekbatan and the neighborhood marketplace, allowing the project to amplify rather than deny. The forces already shaping the site. To develop the project, we designed a board game. A game board represents our site. From the existing building, we extracted a structural grid and projected it onto the board. This transformed the site into a playable field governed by a set of rules. The challenge was to establish rules that could operate somewhere between accident and predictability, allowing chance to generate architectural outcome. These rules guide the relationship between different programs while leaving enough freedom to unexpected spatial configuration to emerge a constantly evolving but partially predictable system. We then designed modular pixels that could rotate in multiple directions. Each rotation generated a different spatial condition, increasing the number of possible architectural outcomes. Each program was assigned a specific color. And then the logo pieces representing those programs were painted accordingly. Also, the space existing between the Legos is trying to belong to the informal programs that we see in sites. Random numbers were assigned to every cell on the game board. By rolling the dice, the game begins. At the center of the board, recalling the atrium of the existing building, we place black cells, and whenever a model lands on one of these cells, it transforms into a void, generating an atrium or empty space within the future building. The next step was defining starting points. These starting points function similarly to the attractor points used by Meredith in his simulation. They establish an approximate center of gravity for each programs, encouraging clusters to emerge without determining their exact boundaries. Each program is assigned several colored starting points. When a model lands on a cell of its own color, it's redirected in different direction. As a result, each program gradually occupied an imprecise and constantly changing territory rather than a fixed boundary. The game progresses by rolling the dice and placing models drawn randomly from a bag onto the board. Each program follows its own relational rules. In every round, by rolling the dice, we can put a corner of logos on that number. Parking module Purple must remain directly connected throughout the game. Residential module and green and red may be separated by up to 2 cells. The game continues floor by floor, with each completed run representing one level of the future building. An unpredictable moment, the entire game board rotates randomly. The game then continues on the rotated board, introducing another layer of unpredictability into the system and recall our daily life also. Once all levels are generated, ramps, stairs, and bridge are introduced to weave a network of connection across fragmented layers rather than resolving them into a whole. Finally, the generated geometry informed our architectural envelope. The facade are wrapped with corrugated sheets, whose orientation follows and the direction of each individual module. For the commercial units, the translucent polycarbonated panels provide visual continuity while maintaining the same formal language. External escape stairs are expressed through ladder-like elements attached to the facade, becoming the part of individual identity of the building. That's it.
Thanks so much. Yeah, so after geometry is basically reacting to the essay called After Geometry, written by Greg Lynn. And the way Greg Lynn and other digital architects, they were proposing a super high resolution buildings. I think this was an argument for a kind of low resolution building. I think that's what the students are trying to achieve, building. And then if parametricism was about having a real parameter for everything from the outside world, here is much more randomized as the process of the game that the students explain. So would love to have your comments on these projects.
Yeah, I mean, because I am familiar with Michael Meredith. He was my professor, and I did work for him. Maybe I'll put a word like a English vocabulary out there, and it's a very easy word and idea from which I can maybe hopefully we can elaborate upon it, and I wonder how it translates into Farsi. And that word is sloppiness, right? Sloppiness. The precision from which I guess the changes of the times from which parametricism and high resolution, the game of the rules of the game not only created kind of precise, kind of beautiful, high quality, high craft digital work, and there's a kind of like a digital sensibility to it. What if the rules were done so in a way, were misread in such a way where the angle of the rotation is off, but then the glitch of that angle is not necessarily breaking the rules, but there's I guess tolerance within the precision of the rules, such sloppiness became possible, right? And as humans, we notice I'm using the word sloppiness and not the word playful, because I find the word playful to be so unproductive. you know, to say something playful, implying that there's no rule to the thing is, and I'm saying, you know, like the word sloppy because there is a rule, and hopefully from the tolerance of that rule, we have maybe a human response to something, to an otherwise rule-based system. Like, so I'm looking at these kinds of bridging elements, some of which, like, clearly a human rotated it. Seems like there's not like the precision of the. I like the lack of, you know, apparent precision of those rules. I mean, I'm also thinking about, you know, the discourse of maybe. So one commonality between a lot of the early digital work is that the parametric system, for lack of better words, did a brick project. You know, what do I mean by this? A normal brick is a brick about this big, and you stack it. And there are a few ways of doing it. For those of us who are studying for the ARE, maybe it's soldier, maybe it's sailor, you know, so on and so forth, right? But and so there are a few rules to the stacking of the brick, and there are also maybe within the stacking of the brick there are layers of the brick and so forth. Now, if the brick is not the size and shape, but rather it's a ellipsoid that's been sort of twisted, and you have to, so less of a brick but more of a elaborate digital tile, right? And how do you kind of assemble the digital tiles together in a repeatable way? That was a lot of the early digital people were doing this, you know. I guess, you know, just thinking about examples of the very many is still kind of doing it, you know. Okay, I say this because if we were to change the size of the brick to a dwelling unit, in a way, Moshe Safdie's Habitat 67 was also a brick problem, just at a very large scale, right? And that brick problem, the modularity of the bricks are the units. And, you know, I think this idea of the repeatable brick system is also here in the massing. It's not just in the kind of like game tile that you introduce in plan, like the game chess, but also in the 3D assembly. That for me extends the question of the post-digital or post-parametric to be including Moshe Safdie's Habitat 67, right? And I yeah. So the project is really rich, and obviously, if we were in person, if we have more time, I would have really wanted to really interrogate the rules. I feel like it's kind of hard to be sloppy about a game without really knowing the game, without really knowing the rules. When you were presenting the rules, I was following as much as I can, but I don't think I know how to play it. And I think if we have more time, I would have questions. But overall, you know, like everybody in the studio, I'm very impressed by the class at large. You know, I think the readings were very timely and appropriate, and they have in concert with each other. They really form a larger question about the contemporary discourse, and I really love it. Super fantastic work.
Thank you, Jimenez. Thanks so much. I'm gonna briefly translate. خیلی دوست داشت این کار رو و تعریف کرد. هیمنز قبلا گفت که مایکل مردیت استادش روی تو دانشگاه و باهاش کارم کرده بوده و میگه من اگه بخوام کار مایکل مردیت رو تو یک کلمه خلاصه کنم، اون سلاپینس یا مثلا به فارسی شاید بشه گفت یه جور شلختگی هست، یه جور اینکه در قید و بند قواعد نباشی، حالا اینا یه ذره بچرخن، یکم رندوم به نظر بیان، اتفاقی به نظر بیان، که ما قبلا حسابی در موردش گپ زدیم تو کلاس. و یک جورایی یک جوابی به پروژه دیجیتالی که به نظر هیمنز یک پروژه مثل آجرچینی میمونه در مقیاس بزرگ. اشاره کرد به پروژه موشه صفدی هابیتات 67 که ما با هم قبلا با زمانش صحبت کردیم. میگه اونم انگار در زمان خودش انگار یک پروژه، یک سوال دیجیتال داشته. در نهایت نکته‌ای که داره میگه که من اگر که حضوری بودیم و فرصت بیشتری بود، خیلی دقیق میشدم در قوانین بازیتون و سعی میکردم که مو رو از ماس بکشم بیرون. ولی سعیم کردم دنبال کنم قوانین بازیتون رو، تا یه جایی فهمیدم، هنوز متوجه ولی 100% نمیدونم چطوری میتونم این بازی انجام بدم. ولی خلاصه این دیالوگ بین قوانین بازی در برابر شلختگی چیزی که داره پروژه رو شکل میده. پروژه خیلی ریچیه به نظرش و همین. و در کل به نظرش دوره جالبی بوده که با این 5 تا مقاله داریم که به سوالای خیلی معاصر جواب میدیم.
Yeah, I think I also really like your project, and the representation is really amazing. You know, Meredith talks a lot about complexity and contradiction, and he says that these are not problems to eliminate, but opportunities to enrich the work. And so I think one thing that your project can really push is to embrace overlap and embrace that multiplicity, and also that not everything has to be resolved into a kind of a single organizational idea. So I think that the premise of the board game as a generative framework is really compelling. I think it establishes that clear set of rules and relationships about how your project is produced. But I think at the same time, like, that board game is not only about rules, it's also about chance and negotiations and tensions and unpredictabilities. So I really think your project could benefit from introducing more of those qualities into your architecture. So I really like Jimenez's point about sloppiness, and I find myself seeing a lot of this framework about rules and less about maybe of that informality that could emerge when these rules are tested and negotiated and broken. So right now your project seems really focused on drawing the positive, which is like the built architecture, your modules, and the objects. And I'm actually really interested in the negative, which is something you kind of tweaked on but didn't really elaborate, which is your leftover spaces, your gaps, those beautiful moments of overlap, and all of those spaces in between. So I would challenge, I guess, maybe the pieces or the modules itself. Like, if your residential component is driven by the logic of that Tetris piece, perhaps maybe the commercial or those collective spaces you guys were interested in could emerge from the residual conditions created by those pieces, like those in-between leftover pieces, rather than, again, another predetermined module. So in other words, could that informality and that flexibility be located in the leftover space rather than a repeated object? And I think a really helpful reference might be Rem Koolhaas's writings on elements of architecture. So he focuses on buildings not as complete objects, but studies individual architectural elements, so stairs, corridors, balconies, doors, elevators, and like those relationships that they produce. And so looking at these blue interventions that you guys propose, I actually wonder if you could start thinking about them less as isolated circulation attachments, but what happens theoretically if we try to connect all the blue pieces to one another. And in that formulation of that network across the projects, that could introduce that informal system that operates against the rigidity of the grid or the module. So these blue pieces connecting could be those alternate routes, social encounters, unexpected relationships, negotiations. So I think the opportunity to create productive tension between the rule and the exception, between framework and kind of informality, I think would be really helpful to your project. So if we're pushing on Meredith's reading, you can have multiple organizational systems, you can have complexities and kind of contradictions together.
Thank you very much. خیلی نکات خوب و زیادی گفت با سخت خلاصه کردنش در مورد تضاد و پیچیدگی، ولی مطمئنم بچه‌ها خیلی هاشو میفهمن آلردی و خیلی هاشم بعداً ترجمه میکنن وقتی که این ضبط شدهشو گوش میکنن. ولی در مورد بحث تضاد و پیچیدگی صحبت کرد که مریت بهش اشاره میکنه، در مورد فضاهای لفت اوور، فضاهای باقی مونده بین این بلاک هایی که تولید شده صحبت کرد که خوب اینا پروگرام بشن. در مورد رم کوولهاس و نظرش در مورد المان‌های معماری صحبت کرد، مثل پله، رمپ، اینا که اینا چه ارزشی دارن و هر کدوم اینجا دارن هایلایت میشن. و در نهایت اون المان‌های آبی که انگار دارن میان و به عنوان یک المان دومی این گرید رو دارن به هم میزنن. دیالوگی که بین اونا و بقیه اجزا هست، دیالوگی که بین نظم و بی‌نظمی هست در پروژه و همه این مسائل. خیلی ممنون سبا. Thanks so much. همینجا Your comment.
Thanks for this project. It's a very beautiful project. I was thinking about what Temesa says about brick, and there's a very kind of interesting architect in Uruguay from, I think, 60s or 40s, that he breaks the logic of laying the bricks by working with mortar, because that's the part that is flexible. That's the part that you have the possibility of expanding and shrinking. In your work, the mortar is that leftover space that Saba was mentioning. And that's the part that makes this project fly or not, or just, I would say one project that I was thinking of that can be a good kind of example of this kind of project is the project from Soil, Vanderbilt project in New York, that the entire project is about dealing with blocks of units and the leftover as a very enriched kind of experience of public, semi-public and private spaces, and a kind of very rich experience of residents from the entry to the site to their door, as a kind of what they see, how they interact, how they kind of occupy, and which of the in-between spaces are left for kind of very dynamic programming of the space by the residents in the future. But generally speaking, that those kind of the mortar of those space, the mortar of this project is the one, the blue line. That's the one that needs much more progress to become kind of different level of the same concept. I think that's the part that you can push it forward, and you can have a little bit more study and understanding of what is there and how those kind of space in between can enrich the residents' experience of this space altogether.
Thanks so much. Wonderful comment. امینم اشاره کرد به بحث آجرها که هیمنز پیش کشید و بعد بحث فضای بین اینها که سبا بهش اشاره کرد و یک رفرنسی داد به معماری به اسم DST، لادیو DST، که این با آجر کار میکرد و خود آجر یک چیز ریجید سفته، ولی ملاتش چون قابل انعطافه، اون با کم و زیاد کردن ملات سعی میکرد اون انعطاف رو بگیره در کاراش و شما انگار اون فضای اضافه بین این پروژه ها یا حتی اون آبیا ملات بین آجراتونه و چطور میشه از اون به عنوان یک پتانسیل برای سازماندهی و پویا کردن فضاهاتون استفاده کرد، چون خود بلاکاتون که یک چیز ریجیده دیگه با اون آبیه، ولی شما این انعطاف انگار آوردین توی پروژه. همینطور رفرنس دادم به پروژه واندربیلت از شرکت سویل که اونم داره سعی میکنه با همین بلاک و فضای بین اونها تجربه ما از زمان ورود تا خروج تو این پروژه صحبت کنه. تو این پروژه مطرح میشه و رفرنس بسیار مهمی و خوبیه که شما خوب بهش نگاه کنید. I think we have a few minutes. Yasser John, any concluding comments?
Thank you, Saba. Thank you, Jimenez. Thank you, Amin. In recent months, we were not even sure whether we would be able to finish this studio or not in weird days, but I believe that tonight it was a lovely landing for this journey by your kind comments. Thank you, and I want to sincerely thank Kimia Tagipur, the TA of the studio, for her generous help in these days.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I want to also applaud the students who worked during these difficult days. They didn't have internet for several weeks, being disconnected from the world. It's really difficult. It's impossible to work. We cannot even lose our internet for a minute here nowadays. And I think it's great. There was so much passion in the work to put this together and finish the project. And I'm happy that they were seen, the projects were seen from outside, from critics abroad. And then I think it was a wonderful conversation. Thanks so much for everyone. Thanks for being so generous with your time. It means a lot. It means a lot to us.
Thank you.
Together some
Yeah. We can see them in
Thank
one
you very,
frame.
very much.
مرسی از بچه‌ها. خسته نباشید. همگی بخیر. Thanks, Jimenez. Thanks, Amin. Thanks, Sabo. So hope you enjoy your rest of your day.
Thank you, Arya.
Goodbye.
Bye for now.
Have a great day.
Thank you all so much. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much.
Khudafez. Khudafez.
چه فارسی
چه سی داری؟
خسته نباشید.
خدا